The night sky burned with falling metal and broken ships. Among the debris of a shattered fleet, one small human vessel drifted like a wounded bird. Its hull was torn, its engines silent, but inside the pilot still clung to life. His name did not matter to the empty stars. What mattered was that he refused to die. With hands trembling and body weak, he forced the ruined craft down toward the green surface of the unknown world below. Fire trailed behind him as the ship cut through the air, groaning like a dying beast. When it finally struck the ground, the crash shook the forest and sent smoke into the sky. He crawled from the wreckage, his uniform torn, his side bleeding from a deep wound. The air was heavy with strange scents, the soil rich and alien under his hands. Every breath stabbed at his chest, but he pushed himself to stand. His mind told him he was alone on this world, a lost soldier in an endless war, but his heart told him survival was still possible. Humans were fragile compared to many species, yet they carried something inside that would not let them give in so easily. He leaned against a shattered piece of metal, listening to the forest. The sounds were not comforting. Insects hummed, unseen creatures called out in the distance, and shadows moved where no wind stirred the leaves. As the sun dipped below the horizon, shapes began to appear at the edges of the smoke. Tall figures cloaked in silver armor stepped from the trees, their movements smooth and deliberate. Their eyes glowed faintly and their weapons shimmered with energy. The soldier tightened his grip on a broken piece of pipe, though he knew it was useless against such power. He stood his ground. If this was the end, he would not meet it on his knees. The armored beings surrounded him, speaking in a tongue he could not understand. Their voices were sharp, filled with authority. Two of them aimed their weapons at his chest. He expected death, but it did not come. Instead, one of them raised a hand and signaled to the others. They closed in and seized him, their grip strong as iron. He struggled, but his strength was gone, and soon he was dragged through the forest, his boots leaving a trail in the soil. Hours seemed to pass as they moved deeper into the alien land. Finally, they entered a great city hidden among the trees, its towers shaped like living branches fused with stone. Lights glowed softly along the walls, casting a pale silver hue across the streets. The soldier was pulled into a vast hall, its ceiling high and filled with banners of deep crimson. At the end of the chamber stood a figure unlike the others. She was taller than any of her guards, her posture straight, her presence commanding. Her crown was made not of metal but of something alive, like crystal that pulsed faintly with light. Her eyes were sharp, filled with intelligence and something deeper, something harder to read. She did not speak at once. She only studied the human as he was forced to his knees before her. The guards bowed their heads, waiting for her judgment. The soldier raised his gaze, his face pale but his spirit unbroken. He did not know who she was, but he felt her importance. This was no ordinary leader. This was their queen. At last her voice filled the hall. It was calm, yet it carried the weight of command. Though he could not understand the words, the tone was clear. She wanted answers. The soldier pressed his hand against his bleeding wound, steadying his breath. He whispered in his own language, his words low but strong. "I am human. I came from the stars. I did not choose to land here, but fate brought me." The queen tilted her head, her expression unreadable. For a long moment, silence filled the hall. Then, with a motion of her hand, she signaled her healers forward. The guards protested, their voices raised in alarm, but the queen silenced them with a single glance. She had made her choice. The healers touched his side, examining the wound. Their instruments glowed softly, their hands careful yet precise. The soldier felt strange warmth flow into his body, dulling the pain. He did not resist. His eyes flickered to the queen again, and in her gaze he saw something he did not expect. It was not pity nor simple curiosity. It was recognition, as if his suffering, his wound, was something she already knew, something she feared. The hall remained tense, the air heavy with unspoken questions. The queen's guards looked at her with unease, unsure why she spared this stranger. The soldier, though still weak, sat straighter under her eyes. He felt that his arrival on this world was no accident. Whatever destiny lay ahead, it began here in this hall, under the watchful gaze of an alien queen who had stiffened at the sight of his wound. The queen remained on her throne, her eyes fixed on the wounded human. Around her, the whispers of her council grew louder. They did not trust the stranger. To them, he was nothing more than an invader, a dangerous spark that could burn their fragile peace. Yet she raised her hand, and silence fell across the chamber. Her gaze never left the soldier. The healers continued their work. Strange light pulsed through their tools, closing the torn flesh, easing the bleeding, but even they exchanged uncertain glances. It was not the wound itself that unsettled them, but the way his blood seemed to resist their touch. It was alive in a way they did not understand. The queen watched with a steady expression, but when the crimson color spread across his side, her hands tightened against the arms of her throne. Something old stirred in her memory. The soldier's strength slowly returned. His breathing steadied, though the weight of exhaustion pressed on him. When the healers stepped back, he struggled to rise. The guards moved to force him down again, but the queen raised her hand. The soldier remained standing, weak yet unyielding. He bowed his head slightly, not in surrender but in respect. He tried to speak again, his words broken by pain and by the barrier of language. "I thank you." The words were simple, but the tone carried meaning beyond translation. The queen's head tilted as she studied him. She did not know his tongue, yet she felt the weight of his gratitude. Her council broke the silence, voices rising in protest. One elder stepped forward, his armor marked with years of service. He bowed before the throne and spoke with urgency. His voice was sharp, his eyes fixed on the human. He reminded the queen that their people had suffered before from outsiders, that mercy often led to betrayal. His warning echoed in the hall. Many nodded in agreement, their fear plain. The queen listened, but she did not answer at once. She looked at the soldier instead. His shoulders were straight, his eyes steady despite his weakness. He did not appear as a conqueror nor as a coward. He looked like someone who had endured far more than most. For a moment, the queen felt the weight of two paths before her. She could listen to her counsel and cast him aside, or she could follow the voice within her that told her his presence mattered. The soldier was taken from the great hall, not as a prisoner but as a guest under watch. Guards escorted him through the palace corridors, their weapons close at hand, their eyes suspicious. He limped, but he did not falter. He studied the halls with quiet curiosity. The walls shimmered with living light, patterns that moved like flowing water. The air carried a soft hum, as if the building itself breathed. Though strange, it did not feel hostile. He was placed in a chamber high above the city. From its balcony he could see the forest stretching endlessly, silver light gleaming across the towers below. The guards left him there, the heavy doors closing behind them. For the first time since his crash, he was alone. He sank onto the edge of the bed, pressing a hand to his side. The healers had closed the wound, yet he knew it was not gone. It still throbbed, reminding him of his weakness. But he also knew the queen had spared him, and that meant something. Night deepened over the city. Strange stars filled the sky, brighter than those he had seen from his homeworld. He did not know if he would ever see Earth again. The thought weighed on him, yet he did not surrender to despair. Humanity was built to endure the impossible. Meanwhile, in her private chamber, the queen stood before a great window of crystal. Her advisors still argued outside, but she let their voices fade. She closed her eyes and remembered the old stories told to her as a child. Stories of a time when her people had faced a darkness beyond the stars, a threat they could not overcome. It was then that humans had appeared, fragile in body yet fierce in spirit. The stories claimed humans had fought where others had fallen, that their wounds carried a fire that could not be extinguished. Many dismissed these tales as myth, but when she saw the stranger's blood, something inside her had stirred with certainty. The legends were real. She opened her eyes and spoke softly to herself. Why now? Why him? The stars outside offered no answer. The next day she summoned him again. The guards brought the soldier before her, and once more the council gathered. The queen studied his face as he stood tall, though the wound still weakened him. She spoke in her tongue, her words steady. Though he could not understand them, he felt the intent behind them. She was questioning him, demanding to know who he was, why he had come, and what he carried. He touched his chest, then pointed toward the stars. His voice was low but firm. I am human. From beyond. The words were lost in translation, but the queen felt the weight of them. The hall grew silent again. She could not deny the sense growing within her. This man was not here by chance. He was part of something larger, something that would change both his world and hers. The queen sat in silence after the human spoke. Though the words carried no meaning in her language, the way he touched his chest and pointed toward the stars painted the picture she needed. He was from far away. He was not a spy from a rival house nor a wanderer from a nearby tribe. He came from beyond their skies. The council shifted uneasily, their voices whispering with doubt and suspicion. They feared what such a being might mean for their people, but the queen kept her gaze on him, her eyes searching for truth beyond words. She motioned for the healers to step closer again. This time they examined the wound more carefully. Their tools glowed with pale light as they passed them over his side. The soldier clenched his jaw but stood still. What unsettled the healers was not his resistance, but the way the wound seemed to reject their craft. Their healing was powerful, known to mend even the deepest cuts of their kind. Yet his blood carried a strange pulse, a rhythm that resisted their touch. One of the healers pulled back in confusion, whispering to the queen that his body was different, untamed. The queen stiffened again, her thoughts pulling her back to the ancient records hidden in the vaults of her ancestors. She remembered the words carved into stone, warning of creatures of flesh that bled but never surrendered, who rose again even when their bodies failed. They were described not as monsters but as protectors, wielders of a force her people could not name. Seeing the human stand before her, breathing through pain yet unbroken, she felt those words echo through her mind. The council did not share her wonder. One advisor stepped forward, his voice sharp with anger. He argued that the human was dangerous, that his wound was proof of corruption, and that to keep him alive was to invite ruin. Another added that the rival houses already doubted her rule, and this act of mercy would only give them fuel to rebel. Their warnings rose like a storm in the hall, but the queen did not yield to their noise. She raised her hand once more and silence returned. She dismissed the council for the moment, leaving only the guards, the healers, and the human in the chamber. She rose from her throne and stepped down the stone steps, her presence filling the room with a quiet authority. The guard stiffened but did not move. The queen walked until she stood before the soldier. Her eyes studied him closely, from the weary set of his shoulders to the defiance still burning in his gaze. The human did not bow. He did not understand their customs, yet even if he had, he might not have lowered himself. Instead, he met her eyes directly. That act alone unsettled the guards, for no one among their kind dared to hold the queen's gaze for long. Yet she did not strike him for it. Instead, she felt a spark of something rare, an equal standing before her, not by power but by spirit. She lifted her hand slowly and gestured to his wound. Her voice when she spoke was quiet but firm. Though he did not know her words, he sensed her meaning. She was asking about the pain, about how he could still stand with such an injury. The human placed a hand over the wound, his fingers pressing against the cloth. He winced but straightened again. His answer came not through language but through action. He tapped his chest once more, then raised his hand in a small gesture of rising, of enduring. The queen understood. His wound did not define his weakness. It revealed his strength. That night, as the soldier was taken back to his chamber, the queen remained awake in her private hall. She dismissed her guards and sat before the ancient crystal records that lined the walls. Symbols glowed faintly across their surfaces, recounting the stories of past ages. She traced her hand along the carvings, stopping at one that spoke of the fire-blooded. It described beings who bled like rivers, yet carried within them the will of storms, who stood when all others fell. The text said that when such a being arrived again, it would mark the beginning of change. The queen closed her eyes. She remembered how her body had stiffened at the sight of his blood, how something old and buried within her people's history had risen to the surface. She could not ignore it. Whether the council wished it or not, this human mattered. His wound was not a curse but a sign. The following morning, unrest stirred in the palace. Rumors spread through the city that the queen had taken in a stranger from the stars. Some spoke in fear, whispering that he was an omen of war. Others, curious, gathered near the palace gates, hoping to catch sight of him. The queen knew the balance of her rule was delicate, yet she also knew she could not allow fear to decide her path. She summoned the human once more, this time not in the great hall but in a smaller chamber lit by soft silver light. There were no crowds, no council, only the queen and the stranger. She studied him again, her voice lower than before, as if speaking not to a prisoner but to a guest. She asked questions, though he could not understand. He responded in kind, his gestures simple, his tone steady. Though their words failed, a bridge began to form between them, one built on patience and unspoken trust. For the first time in her reign, the queen felt uncertain of the future. Yet she also felt hope, a feeling she had not allowed herself in many years. She did not know why fate had brought this human to her world, but she knew his wound carried more than pain. It carried meaning, and deep within she feared what that meaning might awaken. The palace awoke with a different kind of tension. The guards spoke in low voices as they changed shifts. The council members argued more fiercely behind closed doors, and the people outside gathered in restless groups. Whispers of the human spread across the city like fire through dry grass. Some said he was a gift from the stars, others said he was a danger that would bring ruin. No matter what was believed, no one could ignore that his presence had unsettled the balance. The queen felt the weight of it more than anyone. She had chosen to keep him alive when tradition demanded caution. Her decision was already questioned, but she did not waver. She had seen something in the man's wound, something in his eyes, and she could not forget it. Still, her advisors pressed her every hour. They told her the rival factions would use this moment to strike. They warned her that kindness to an outsider would be seen as weakness. The human, meanwhile, remained in his high chamber. He tried to rest, but the air outside carried a nervous hum. He could hear voices beyond the balcony, chants rising and falling as the crowd argued below. He did not understand their words, but he understood the emotion: fear, curiosity, anger. These were things that needed no translation. He walked slowly around the room, his hand resting on the wall as he steadied himself. His body healed, but each movement reminded him of the wound. It burned, but it also reminded him he was alive. One morning, as the first light broke across the forest canopy, the queen sent for him again. This time she did not bring him to her private chamber. She wanted to see how her people would react when they saw him not as a prisoner, but as someone who stood beside her. The guards led him down wide steps into a courtyard filled with banners. Citizens gathered beyond the gates, pressing close to catch a glimpse. Their eyes widened as the human walked slowly, his shoulders squared, his gaze steady. The queen entered the courtyard soon after, her crown glimmering in the morning light. She did not speak to the crowd at first. She only walked beside the human. The sight alone silenced many voices, though others hissed and whispered. The council stood nearby, their faces hard, their patience thinning. Before words could be spoken, a sudden sound split the air. A shriek of warning came from the guards at the edge of the courtyard. Arrows of light streaked across the sky, striking the outer walls with violent force. The rival faction had chosen their moment well. Smoke rose quickly, and soldiers in dark armor poured into the outer streets. The people screamed and scattered, their chants replaced with cries of fear. The queen's guards drew their weapons, forming a line before her. The council shouted in panic, some calling for retreat. The queen herself remained still, her eyes fixed on the attackers breaking through the gates. And then she saw it, the human stepping forward instead of back. His wound was still fresh, his strength not fully returned, but he did not hesitate. He snatched a weapon from a fallen guard and turned toward the oncoming wave. The queen's heart tightened as she watched. He could have stayed behind her protection, yet he chose to stand where the danger was greatest. The guards, shocked, followed his lead. He moved with desperate energy, striking not with elegance but with determination. Every swing of his weapon was a promise to protect not himself, but those who could not fight. The enemy pressed hard, their numbers greater, their weapons sharper. But the human's courage spread like fire among the queen's soldiers. They began to fight with renewed strength, shouting as they pushed back against the attackers. The queen herself lifted her staff, its crystal glowing with fierce light, and unleashed a wave of energy that scattered the enemy line. Together, her power and the human's resolve began to turn the tide. When the last of the rival soldiers fell back, retreating into the forest, the courtyard stood in ruins. Smoke curled from shattered walls, and the ground was littered with broken banners. The people crept from their hiding places, their eyes wide as they saw the human still standing, his chest rising and falling with heavy breaths. Blood darkened his side again, but his grip on the weapon did not loosen. The queen walked toward him slowly. Around them, silence spread. Every eye watched as she stood before the human, her face unreadable. For a moment she said nothing. Then she lifted her hand, not to strike, not to command, but to rest lightly against his shoulder. It was a gesture her people had never seen her give to anyone outside her bloodline. It was a gesture of trust. The crowd gasped. Some fell to their knees, others cried out in confusion. But all knew something had changed. The queen had seen the human's strength with her own eyes, and so had they. He was no ordinary stranger. He was proof of the old stories, proof that courage could come from beyond their stars. The council, though still uneasy, could not deny the truth of what they had witnessed. The queen looked at the human once more, her voice low enough for him alone. Though he did not understand the words, he felt the weight of them. She was telling him that he had earned more than survival. He had earned his place. That night, the fires of battle still smoldered outside the city. But within the palace, a different fire had been lit. The queen knew her choice was dangerous, yet she no longer doubted it. The human was part of something greater, and his wound was not only his burden. It was a sign that his spirit was stronger than pain. And for the first time, her people had begun to see it too. The city still carried the scars of the attack. Walls bore fresh cracks, smoke curled from broken towers, and the air smelled of burned stone. Yet despite the damage, the people whispered of what they had seen. A stranger from the stars had fought not for conquest, but for them. The story grew with every telling, carried through markets and homes. Some called him a savior, others an omen, but none could deny his courage. The human remained weak from the battle. His wound bled again, and though the healers tended him through the night, the fire in his body would not fully settle. Still, he refused to rest long. At dawn, he walked the palace halls slowly, leaning on the wall when his strength faltered. Servants watched him with cautious eyes, but when he paused to help one lift a fallen jug, their fear softened. He did not act like a conqueror. He moved with the same care he had shown on the battlefield, always ready to help another before himself. The queen heard these reports as she sat in council. Her advisors remained divided. Some insisted the stranger be cast out before rival houses gathered strength again. They argued that his presence threatened not only her throne, but the stability of the entire realm. Others, though fewer, admitted what they had seen. The queen's people had grown cautious, bound by rules and tradition, but this human had acted with simple bravery. He had protected without promise of reward. Such a thing was rare. The queen listened to every voice, but her mind was already made. She dismissed the council and went to see him herself. She found him standing by the balcony, his hand pressed against his side, his eyes on the horizon where smoke still rose. He turned when she entered, his face pale but steady. For a long moment, neither spoke. Words were useless between them, yet something passed in their silence. Respect, curiosity, a fragile trust. She stepped closer and pointed to his wound. Her voice was low, almost gentle, as she asked a question he could not understand. Still, he knew what she meant. He touched the bandaged side, then shook his head as if to say, "It still hurts, but I will endure." She studied him carefully, and again she felt that strange pull inside her. His body was fragile, yet his spirit was stronger than any blade. Later that day, unrest stirred again in the outer districts. The rival faction had not been destroyed, only pushed back. Their spies moved in the shadows, spreading fear, saying the queen had betrayed her people by siding with an outsider. The guards captured some, but the whispers continued. The queen knew another strike would come soon, and she had to decide how to face it. That night, she called the human to a small chamber lit by the glow of crystal lamps. There were no guards this time, only the two of them. She wished to test the bond between them, to see if trust could grow stronger than fear. She pointed to the stars above, then to him, then to herself. Her hand touched the crystal floor, tracing a circle that meant unity in her people's language. He watched closely, trying to understand. Slowly, he raised his hand and repeated the gesture, his circle rough but clear. The queen felt something tighten in her chest. For the first time, he had answered her not with words, but with her own sign. The following morning brought another test. Scouts rushed into the palace, reporting that a larger enemy force gathered at the edge of the forest. They had weapons powered by stolen crystal, and their numbers were greater than before. The council panicked. Some demanded retreat, others called for negotiations. The queen stood firm. She would not abandon her people. Yet even she knew the odds were grim. The human listened from the side of the hall. He could not understand their language, but he saw the fear on every face. He stepped forward, surprising all. He placed a hand against his chest and pointed toward the gates. His meaning was clear enough. He would fight again. The council erupted in outrage, shouting that he would only bring doom. But the queen raised her hand, silencing them. Her eyes locked on his, and in that moment she chose to believe in him. When the battle came, it was unlike the last. The enemy stormed the city with fire and rage, their weapons tearing through stone. Yet the human did not stay in the safety of the palace. He led the charge with the queen's guards, his steps heavy but unbroken. He fought not with skill but with heart, placing himself between the enemy and those who could not defend themselves. Even when struck down to one knee, he rose again, his wound bleeding fresh. The queen joined him, her staff glowing with power, her presence turning fear into courage among her soldiers. Side by side they fought, alien majesty and human resolve bound together. The people watched from rooftops and windows, and something shifted within them. For the first time they saw their queen not alone on her throne, but standing with an equal. And for the first time they saw a human's will with their own eyes. When the enemy finally fell back, leaving the city scarred but standing, the people cheered not only their queen but also the stranger who bled for them. The queen looked at him across the broken courtyard, his face pale with exhaustion, his body trembling, yet his eyes still alive with fire. She understood then that his wound was not a weakness. It was the mark of what made him human, the strength to fight beyond pain, to protect without demand. And she knew her people would never see him as just a stranger again. The city healed slowly after the second battle. Towers were repaired, walls were reinforced, and the people carried on with their daily lives, though the memory of fire and smoke lingered. Yet alongside fear there was also something new, a quiet pride. They spoke of the human with awe. Children whispered his name, though they did not know it, calling him the Star Warrior. Merchants told how he stood in the gates when all else seemed lost. Even the queen's most loyal guards admitted they had never seen such determination. But inside the palace the queen was troubled. The wound she had seen when he first arrived still haunted her. It was not simply the blood or the weakness of flesh. It was the way his injury had awakened an echo in her memory, a truth her people had long buried. She knew the time had come to share it, though part of her feared the council's reaction. That night she summoned the human to a private chamber deep within the palace. The walls were lined with tall crystal stones that glowed faintly, each one etched with marks of her ancestors. The air felt heavy, as if history itself filled the room. The human entered slowly, his steps uneven but steady. His wound still hurt, yet his spirit showed no sign of breaking. The queen stood before the largest crystal, her crown casting silver light across the chamber. She gestured for him to come closer. He obeyed, his eyes scanning the strange markings. She touched the surface. When the stone answered her with a soft hum, symbols shifted and glowed, forming scenes that played out like shadows of the past. The human watched with silent wonder. The first image showed her people long ago, standing against a great darkness. Vast shapes, neither beast nor machine, filled the sky. They were enemies from beyond the stars, stronger than any army her ancestors could summon. The queen's voice was calm but low as she spoke. Though he could not understand her language, her tone carried the weight of memory. The next image changed. It showed figures unlike her people, smaller, fragile in appearance, yet holding weapons of light. They fought beside her ancestors, not as servants but as allies. The crystals revealed them bleeding, falling, rising again. Their wounds glowed like fire, not because they healed quickly, but because they carried the will to keep moving even when broken. The queen's eyes turned to the human. She pointed at the figures, then at him. The meaning was clear. They were human. He was like them. The soldier's breath caught in his chest. He stared at the images, then touched his side where his wound still throbbed. He understood enough. His kind had been here before, long ago, fighting in battles that shaped this world. His presence was not an accident. It was part of something larger than himself. The queen spoke again, her voice filled with both strength and unease. She explained the part of the story her people rarely repeated. The humans of the past had fought with unmatched courage, but when the war was over, they vanished. Some believed they returned to their homeworld. Others believed they were consumed by the darkness they resisted. Either way, their absence left a silence, and over time her people buried the memory, fearing it as much as they honored it. For to remember humans was to remember their own dependence, their own weakness. Now seeing him wounded yet standing, she could no longer deny the truth of the legends. His blood was not ordinary. It carried the same fire as those who came before. That was why she had stiffened at the sight of it. It was the mark of a history she thought lost, returning to her in flesh and bone. The human listened, his eyes locked on hers, even without full understanding. He could not follow her words, but he felt her meaning in every gesture, in every glance. He touched his chest again, then raised his hand as if swearing an oath. His voice was low but firm. "We fight, always." The queen felt a rare shiver run through her. She had ruled with strength and wisdom, yet she had never seen such clarity. His wound should have ended him, yet it defined his resolve. It was not weakness, it was proof. When the council learned of her private meeting, they grew restless. They warned that her closeness to the human would invite rebellion. They argued that trust in an outsider was dangerous, that he was a shadow of old myths that should remain forgotten. But the queen silenced them with calm authority. She declared before them all that the human was under her protection, not as a prisoner but as an ally. The chamber erupted in outrage, but her word was law. The human stood beside her, silent but unbowed, and for the first time she allowed the court to see what she saw. Not a fragile stranger, but a reminder of what courage meant. Some still doubted, yet others began to wonder if perhaps their queen was right. That evening, as the palace quieted, the queen walked alone through the gardens. She looked up at the stars and thought of the war her ancestors had fought, of the humans who once stood with them. She wondered why fate had brought this one man to her world now, when unrest threatened her throne and rival houses sharpened their blades. She did not know the answer, but she knew she would not face what was coming alone. And in his chamber, the human stared at the night sky as well. His body ached, his wound burned, but his heart was steady. He had been many things in his life, a soldier, a survivor. But now he felt he carried something greater. Not just for himself, not even just for Earth, but for the bond that had begun here with a queen who no longer saw him as a stranger. The wound that once marked his weakness now bound them together. And both knew that greater trials were yet to come. The days that followed were quiet only on the surface. The city returned to its rhythm, the markets reopened, and workers filled the streets again. Yet beneath the calm there was tension, as if everyone sensed that a storm was building. The queen could see it in the eyes of her council, and hear it in the whispers carried through the palace halls. Her choice to protect the human had divided the court. Some saw it as a sign of strength and vision, others called it reckless. The human felt the unease as well. He was not deaf to the stares of soldiers who looked at him with suspicion, nor blind to the way some turned their backs when he passed. Still, he did not flinch. He walked the palace grounds each day, helping servants carry supplies, checking the weapons of the guards, and speaking few words but leaving strong impressions. His presence was not loud, yet it carried weight. People began to notice that wherever he stood, he carried himself as if the place belonged to him. Not out of arrogance, but out of quiet resolve. One night the queen called him to the throne chamber. The vast hall glowed with firelight, and the banners of her house swayed softly in the high air. She dismissed her guards until only the two of them remained. For a long time she stood in silence, studying him as he waited patiently at the base of the throne. Then she stepped down from her seat and came closer. She spoke slowly, her tone heavy with meaning. Though he did not understand every word, he felt the gravity in her voice. She told him of the unrest among the houses, of enemies who were waiting for a chance to strike. She told him of the ancient darkness that had once threatened her world and might rise again. And she confessed something she had never said aloud, that when she first saw his wound, she believed fate itself had sent him. The human listened carefully. When she finished, he placed his hand on his chest, then extended it toward her, palm open. His words were simple, spoken in his own tongue, but his meaning was clear. "I stand with you." For a moment the queen felt something she had not known since she first wore the crown. She felt she was not alone. She placed her hand over his, her eyes steady and calm. A bond was sealed between them, not by ceremony or law, but by shared trust. The following day she summoned the council. The chamber filled with voices that clashed like steel. Some elders demanded the human's removal, fearing he would draw danger upon them. Others argued that he had already proven his worth in battle. The debate grew fierce, yet the queen waited until all had spoken. Then she rose, her crown catching the light. She declared that the human was no longer a stranger, but her chosen ally. He would stand beside her as a guardian of the throne, not beneath her as a servant, but as an equal warrior. The council fell silent. Such a declaration was unheard of. To place an outsider in such a position defied tradition, yet her voice carried the force of certainty, and none could openly oppose her. The human stood quietly at her side through it all, neither proud nor defiant. His presence alone was enough. The people in the galleries whispered as they watched. For the first time, they saw their queen share her place with someone not of their kind, and though it unsettled them, it also stirred curiosity. Days later, the first test of this new bond came. A rival faction sent raiders to strike at the outer villages. The queen prepared her forces, and the human insisted on leading the vanguard. Many doubted him, but when the clash came, he fought as though the wound on his body no longer mattered. He shielded those who could not fight. He pressed forward when others hesitated, and he refused to yield ground. His courage lit a fire in those around him, even in warriors who once doubted him. The battle was not large, but it carried great meaning. When the raiders were driven back, the people returned to the city singing not just the queen's name, but his as well. They began to believe that perhaps this bond was more than a whim of fate. Perhaps it was the beginning of a new age. That night, the queen stood with him on the highest balcony of the palace. The stars stretched endlessly above them, silent witnesses to what had begun. She looked at him with something rare in her eyes, something few had ever seen: hope. "You carry the fire of your kind," she said softly, knowing he might not understand every word, "and that fire will stand with mine." The human nodded, his gaze fixed on the horizon. "Together," he replied simply. They did not know what trials awaited them, nor how far the shadows of the past might reach into their future. But they knew one truth: they would face it side by side. The queen no longer carried the weight of her throne alone, and the human no longer wandered as a broken survivor. In each other, they had found strength neither could claim alone. And so the wound that once made her stiffen in fear had become the mark of a bond that would shape their world. The story of the human and the alien queen was only beginning, but already it was spoken in hushed voices across the land. A new legend had been born,